Good morning, fellow humanists. My name is Todd Kimball, and I'll be your MC today. A reminder that humanists believe that the ultimate goal should be the fulfillment of the potential for growth in each human personality, not for the favored few, but for all of humankind. Humanists urge the use of reasoning and compassion to produce the kind of world we want, a world in which peace, prosperity, freedom, and happiness are widely shared. And our reader today is Joyce Lackey. Joyce?
Thank you, Todd. This is from The Wayfinders, Why Ancient Wisdom Matters in the Modern World by Wade Davis. Davis is an anthropologist, ethnobotanist, filmmaker, photographer, and former National Geographic explorer in residence. In this reading, I can't begin to capture the diversity and beauty of the indigenous cultures he describes in the book, so I'll just focus on a key point. He writes, "People often ask why it matters if these wondrous yet exotic cultures and their belief systems disappear. I respond, if the children of the Mentawai shift their sense of beauty to something more mundane and uninspired than the natural world, or if the Noxie shaman no longer write in stone their native script, the world's last living hieroglyphic language, will the sky fall? No. But we're not talking about the loss of a single species of life or a single cultural adaptation. We're speaking about a waterfall of destruction unprecedented in the history of our species. In our lifetime, half of the voices of humanity are being silenced. The problem is not change. We have this conceit in the West that while we have been celebrating and developing technological wizardry, somehow the other peoples of the world have been static and intellectually idle. Nothing could be further from the truth. Change is the one constant in history. All peoples in all places are always dancing with new possibilities for life. It is neither change nor technology that threatens the integrity of culture. It is power, the crude face of domination. We have this idea that these indigenous peoples, these distant others, quaint and colorful though they may be, are somehow destined to fade away, as if by natural law, as if they are failed attempts at being us. Simply not the case. In every case, these are dynamic living peoples being driven out of existence by identifiable and overwhelming external forces. This is actually an optimistic observation, for it suggests that if human beings are the agents of cultural destruction, we can also be the facilitators of cultural survival. When I was a graduate student, the words biosphere and biodiversity were exotic forms, familiar only to a handful of scientists. Today, they are part of the vocabulary of school children. The biodiversity crisis, marked by the extinction of over 1 billion life forms in the past 3 decades alone, has emerged as one of the central issues of our times. No government on earth can ignore the magnitude of the threat or the urgency of the dilemma. This represents a reorientation of human priorities that is both historic in its significance and profoundly hopeful in its promise.
Thank you, Joyce. A very nice and appropriate reading for our program today. It is a true honor to introduce our speaker today. Like many people here, the TV series Cosmos, produced by Sasha's mother and father, Linda Druyan and Carl Sagan, played an essential role in my understanding of science and the universe. Sasha is continuing the family tradition of inspiring people and leaving intellectual legacies. In 2019, she published the book, Small Creatures Such as We, Rituals for Finding Meaning in Our Unlikely World, which The Guardian called a must-read to understand our time. Sasha regularly speaks and writes on ways science can guide our celebrations and how we mark the passage of time. Her work has been featured in New York Magazine, Oprah Magazine, and Inverse called her one of 50 people who are forces for good in this decade. A warm HGP welcome for Sasha Sagan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that lovely, lovely introduction, Todd. And for the invitation to be here, David, Todd, and Joyce. That reading that you just gave was so moving and so beautiful. And as Todd said, I think a perfect introduction and sort of segue into what I'm eager to talk to you about today. And it's so nice to be here in, this way that we're all getting very, very used to these days, where we get to be face to face, but not in person. And through the magic of science and technology, it makes it possible that though I'm on the other side of the continent, I get to talk to you this morning, and I'm so glad to be here. In lieu of some future way we can be together in the same room. As Todd mentioned, the name of my book is For Small Creatures Such as We, and just to give a little background about how I came to it and what that title really means. My parents, Sagan and Ann Druyan, gave me, and I think millions of other people around the world, this sense of awe and joy and wonder about the natural world, about our place in the universe, and their sort of infectious enthusiasm about how things really are, verifiably, tangibly real things that are around us, the information that we've been able to glean through the scientific method over the last few centuries, presented in a joyful, enthusiastic way that sometimes, we have this idea in our culture of like cold, hard facts, and this idea that if something is tangibly real and provable and verifiable, it's not uplifting and wondrous, and it doesn't give us the chill down the back of our spine that we sometimes associate with things that are mysterious, that we cannot understand. And somehow over the centuries, as we've discovered more about our world and our universe, as we've moved things from the column of supernatural, mysterious, inexplicable religious explanations to, things like earthquakes happen when the tectonic plates shift, not when someone up above is angry. When we've come to understand, an eclipse, the changing of the seasons, natural disasters, the movements of the Earth and the other planets, we've lost the sense of astonishment and that feeling in the pit of our stomach of being part of something grander than ourselves. And so I think in part it's because it can be really scary to think about ourselves as so small in a vast universe. And I think that that's something that existential crisis that many of us have experienced can be really hard, and people shy away from coming face to face with this reality of our place in the universe. And so the title of my book, For Small Creatures Such as We, comes from a line in the novel Contact, which is the only work of fiction my dad ever published. And later it became a movie. But my parents, everything that they did was a collaboration. And that the line, actually my mom wrote, and the rest of the line is, for small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. And this sort of crystallized this idea of, if we are just on this tiny lifeboat in this vast universe where we don't have any reason to believe there's anyone else out there, and we're here for the blink of an eye, and we don't have any evidence to suggest there's anything afterwards, then what do we have? And it's one another, and being together in this moment, and this kind of sense of gratitude that we're here right now together. And so that's what inspired the title of my book. And what I'm really interested in is, because I grew up in this wonderful, joyful, uplifting, scientifically minded household. My dad was an astronomer, and my mom is the science communicator, writer, and producer. And this philosophy that they instilled in me gave me so much. But one of the things about science that can be kind of difficult from a purely scientific worldview is there's no holidays, there are no rituals, there are no traditions and rites of passage in the same way that there are in other cultural traditions. And so we had some, my ancestors were all Jewish. When I do a DNA test, it just comes back Ashkenazi Jew, nothing else in there. And so we had cultural elements of Judaism that my parents carried on in a secular way, reframing them and, taking elements of cuisine and expressions and things like that, and finding ways to honor those who came before us without being beholden to their theology. And so as I got older, I started to think about, well, what would it mean to have a series of rituals and traditions that are really based in a humanistic, scientific worldview? And I lost my dad when I was 14. And, everyone who has had mourned a loss like that knows that really grief calls out for a kind of a framework for reckoning with those emotions, maybe more than almost anything else that we go through as a species. And I started to research the traditions and rituals around the world throughout history. And what astonished me, and still to this day amazes me and gives me an enormous sense of joy, is this idea that when you peel back the specifics of time and place, the set, the script, the costumes that each culture has to mark celebrations and traditions and to mourn, the things that we're doing around the world and throughout history are almost identical. So many of them are based in amazingly scientific events. The equinoxes and solstices are astronomical events because of the axial tilt of our planet and how we revolve around our star. We have these seasonal changes and the light comes and goes at different times in different parts, different hemispheres. And suddenly this idea that underneath, this is all just a celebration of a real scientific phenomenon. And then to think about all the traditions around the world in every culture to welcome a new baby or rites of passage into adulthood, and mourning rituals, funerals, things we do to cope with our grief, it became so clear that those are all biological events, and that we really around the world are all celebrating scientific events. And these changes that, some cyclical, some that happen over and over again, and some that are permanent, that we all sort of found different ways to reckon with throughout time. And so a lot of what my book is about, elements of it are definitely memoir and definitely a love letter to my parents in different ways, but also this exploration of how we can mark time and celebrate these moments without being bogged down in traditions that maybe are no longer reflective of our philosophies or our understanding of the world around us. And so as it's springtime now, and as Todd mentioned, March Madness, even just I do love basketball, and that was my dad's sport. He played at the University of Chicago many, many years ago, and that's what I grew up watching. I'm not athletic at all, but that's what if I'm going to watch a sport, I want it to be basketball. And even just it struck me yesterday, just the phrase March Madness is so much about that. Feels like it's so much about that spring fever and that sense that like anything can happen and everyone's coming alive, and it just feels like unpredictable and wild in the way that springtime does. And so I've been thinking about that, and just the innate optimism that comes from springtime. And we have in so many cultures these themes of renewal and rebirth that are braided into the stories that we, the foundational myths that we tell ourselves at this time around different holidays. I mean, certainly Passover and Easter, but countless others have this theme of, wow, things looked really bad there for a second. That looked like it was not going to work out for us. But lo and behold, now I think things are going to be okay, and we're doing much better. And I think that there's something about that is innately what springtime is, especially because until very recently, for groups of people who lived in places where the winters were really hard, it wasn't clear that everybody was going to make it, that there would be enough food, that everyone in the group would survive. And and then imagining those first days getting a little longer, and the thaw coming, and the plants starting to come back, and the sense of relief. How many generations of human beings must have experienced that sense of real profound physical relief, that things were looking up. And this year, it's amazing, as now we've gone through this entire year in quarantine and in lockdown, and with so much loss for so many people, so many deaths without funerals, so many of the rituals that we have used for generations to come to terms with the pain of loss and isolation unavailable to us. And now that it's been a year, and now that every day, I hope for you too, but in my life, every day someone else I know says, oh, I got my first shot today. Things are starting to look up. You get the sense that there really is a feeling of relief coming, and that better days really are ahead in this way that is so, and I mean, this could have all happened at any time of year, but there's something so profound that this happens to be at springtime, when we are getting to the point where we can see a little light at the end of the tunnel. And this year, the miracle is science. It's because of our understanding of the scientific method, because of our medical researchers and scientists. This is the joyful, profound miracle that has come to be. And I think that when we talk about, I struggle with this a lot. People will ask me, spiritual is a word that has religious connotations, and of course it is. And miracle, and even magic, something feeling magical comes from the magi. The etymology of so many of our words have these very monotheistic connotations, because we speak a language that comes from that culture. And so maybe there are some words missing from the language where we can find a way, some future expression will come, will be devised, so we can find a way to express our sense of awe and gratitude and joy for the secular miracles and the scientific miracles, and have that view of the natural world and the scientific advancements that human beings have managed to suss out in this short time that we as a species in our history have had this understanding, to describe them in a way that does them justice. And so I'm gonna read a few pages from my book. It's so it's divvied up by seasons, monthly rituals, weekly rituals, daily rituals, and times of life. And so I'm going to read a few pages, if you don't mind, from the spring chapter, and then I'll say a bit more. But just to give some context, one of the things I talk about in the spring chapter is the way that my parents sort of found to make the Jewish tradition of a Passover Seder secular and humanist, taking out the, acknowledging the history, of course. And my parents felt very strongly that, even though we didn't believe, it was important that I have an understanding of religious traditions, not just our own, but from all over the world, because it's so integral to human history and to why we are the way we are. And so there's a bit about our secular Passover Seders and a description of many other spring holidays around the world, Nowruz in Iran, and Sham el Nassim in Egypt, and all sorts of other interesting things. Amazing festival in Japan, which I won't get into here. It's a little bit racy, but it's wonderful. And dating back to Rome and beyond. So I'll read a few pages and continue if you don't mind. As a kid, I had a copy of the D'Aulaire Book of Greek Myths, a large yellow paperback featuring an illustration of an expressionless god with rays of light streaming out of his head in all directions, driving a chariot pulled by 4 white horses. This particular god was called Helios, and he was a sun god. According to the people who flourished in the Greek Isles between about 800 and 146 BCE, Helios rode his chariot across the sky each day, bringing morning to the earthlings, driving out the darkness. So he was really the personification of the rotation of the earth, since it is us who moves around the sun, not the other way around. I adored this book, and I frequently demanded my parents read it to me when I was not yet able. Later, I would read and reread the same stories myself, memorizing the genealogy, peccadillos, and particular powers of each god. They were depicted here as blondes, mostly with blue eyes and features that in retrospect seemed more representative of Odin's family than Zeus's. I pictured ancient Greek families worrying and wondering, living their lives. I tried to imagine them meditating on the idea that they were once real people who really lived, and now the world they inhabited had completely changed. From this obsession, I learned a little Greek history and geography, but mostly I learned that religions come and go. I marveled at the intricate beauty and sorrow of these tales, and the idea that these mighty gods had all lost their legions of devotees. I sort of felt sad for them, but at least they got to live on in the names of sneaker brands and space missions. It's perfectly acceptable to see those gods as reflections of their believers. No modern middle school teacher suggests that Zeus was actually born secretly in Crete after his father, the Titan of the harvest, devoured his older siblings. That doesn't get presented as fact the way, say, the whens and wheres of the Peloponnesian War do. We learn that the story of Zeus is just what the Greek people believed, and it's implied that they were mistaken about the true circumstances of the universe. We learn that Demeter was the goddess of grain because grain was important to the Greeks. Grain wasn't important to the Greeks because Demeter was looking over them. The ancient Egyptians and the Mayans worshiped sun gods because our nearest star played such a vital double-edged role in those sweltering climates. The same with Fer, the weather god of the Norse, Mars, the war god of the Romans, and fertility goddesses from Tonatiuhtli of the Aztec to Mbabawana-Warsa of the Zulu. The rains, the crops, the invaders, the kids. This is what determined our future in an uncertain world. This is what we worried about. So these are the gods we created. There is no taboo against saying these gods were invented to cope with the dreams and anxieties of their ancient disciples. So I read my book of Greek mythology as literature instead of history, which was not so dissimilar to the way we looked at the Haggadah. This is what our ancestors believed, the Haggadah. There is wisdom, insight, and poetry in it, but it's not what we believe. One story from the D'Aulaire book of Greek myths stayed with me powerfully. The story of Persephone. She was the daughter of Zeus and Demeter, who actually oversees much more than grain. She guided the whole of agriculture and reproduction, among other things. But beloved Persephone is abducted by Hades, the god of the dead, the underworld, the devil of ancient Greece. Demeter is beside herself. She leaves Mount Olympus for Earth disguised as a lowly old human, searching tirelessly for her daughter and letting her role as the grower of grain fall by the wayside. Food becomes scarce. People starve. The other gods become concerned. Eventually, they decide it's worth their while to band together to organize Persephone's rescue. When Persephone arrives back safely in the arms of her mother, the world blossoms. Food is plentiful. The humans are saved. But while in the underworld, Persephone consumed some pomegranate seeds, internally connecting her to the realm of her kidnapper and obliging her to return to the underworld every year. And the rest of the world is in turn trapped in the cycle of barren winter preceding plentiful spring forever. For the Greeks who believed, this was the origin of the seasons. All these spring legends are about suffering and heartbreak giving way to joy. Each contains a secret, a hidden miracle, offering hope when all seems lost. This is spring itself. The themes of renewal, rebirth, resurrection, and rescue from death are not religious ideals in conflict with nature, but rather rituals inspired by the biology of plants and animals. When I was growing up, Passover wasn't the only springtime holiday we kept sacred at our house. My mother invented a first fruits festival just for me, Blossom Day. As the long upstate winter finally faded, I would start to make daily examinations of the dogwood tree outside our dining room window. My eyes would play tricks on me. Is that something? A teeny tiny hint of a bud? No, maybe tomorrow. I would wait day after day until there was indisputably a blossom on the dogwood tree. My mother and I would go out and marvel at it, and then plan something like a tea party, usually just the two of us, and maybe a friend of hers who lived nearby. Gifts were exchanged, but the biggest gift was the idea that celebrations could be invented, that we could choose to honor that was most meaningful to us, that the knowledge that spring was finally here. Blossom Day stripped away all the other layers to create a new holiday. Some spring day, we will stand at that same dining room window with my daughter and bask in the wonder of it. The tree that seems dead but isn't. Something new is growing. The weather will be better soon. The days will be longer. The sunshine is coming. It still feels magical, miraculous even. So I think that sort of segues us to this idea of inventing, oh, thank you, I can see hands, thank you, to this idea of inventing rituals, which is something that can seem so hard to do, but as evidenced by everyone's here, it is possible, right? You've all come together to invent this ritual, which is in some ways, right, it's Sunday morning. You've taken some of the elements of traditions that predate this modern idea of humanism and used what is useful and meaningful, even if it's just timing. And often timing is really central to this pursuit, and made something new. And the epigram I used in the beginning of that chapter is from Alain de Botton from Religion for Atheists, and it's I should just read it, but I'm not open to the page, so I'm going to paraphrase. But it's something like religions have a tendency to to squat on top of things that are not theirs. And I think that we all do this, and no matter what seems very traditional to us, the things that you think of, like when you think of like, oh, I've got to do this because my great grandmother did it, and if I don't do it, I'm going to be the one breaking the chain. All of that stuff that we consider traditional is brand new on the scale of human history. And I think that, whatever that is, it was taken from something somebody was doing before, back beyond the horizon of time of anyone who we can even access what they were doing. And I think that, every time, a couple comes together, plans a wedding, has a baby, anytime a family has to plan a funeral, there are these moments where we sort of have to come face to face with what do we do because we feel like we should, and what do we do because it's really what is important to us and really reflects what we believe. And I think that this, and what are the things we do that maybe we don't really believe, but we want to feel that connection to our ancestors, where, for many of us, beyond great grandparents, do we know the names of our ancestors? I after 3 or 4 generations, literally the only thing that I know about my ancestors is they were Jews. And so, these events like, having a Passover Seder, eating certain foods at certain times, lighting a candle at certain times, having the December holidays, there is a way that it almost feels like time travel, because that, a few generations back, there's some connection to what the people who you came from were doing. And, that can be a wonderful thing, or it can feel extremely burdensome if it's not what you sort of want to be doing. And so what I'm really interested in and curious about and love talking about, so maybe when we open it up to questions, some people will share, but the rituals and traditions that people have created for themselves. And during this time of the pandemic, everything has shifted so much. And we've now all had every holiday under these circumstances. Everyone's now had a birthday. Everyone's now had, these events that maybe for decades you were doing something one way. And I don't know, for Thanksgiving, which is I'm conflicted about for other reasons, and we'll save that for another day. But my husband and I and our daughters, just the 3 of us for Thanksgiving, which of course it, never would be normally. But we, made the menu what we really were interested in eating, not necessarily like, oh, we have to put the little marshmallows on the sweet potatoes. Like, do we like that? No. So let's not do it. And I think that this horrible, terrible year has, one of the silver linings is it has given people an opportunity to reassess the way they want to do things and what is really meaningful, and, and make things up that maybe they didn't do before, and also realize the importance of marking time, because, we had, especially in the beginning, we had that long period of time where every day felt the same, and it was kind of like you're in your pajamas and no one knew what day of the week it was. And that's what happens when we don't have that rhythm to life. And so, as in the before times when I was able to travel and have some of these conversations with people in person, I got to hear so many amazing anecdotes and rituals that people didn't necessarily think of as rituals, but in this context became clear. And also, I'll just share one of my husband and my favorite rituals that was gifted to us right after we were married by a stranger. And I'll tell you that story, and then maybe you can share some of yours. But we were in Washington, D.C., and it was actually really, my parents' papers were being inducted. I never know what the right verb is, but they were going into the Library of Congress. And it was this really amazing, but very, very emotional event. And so we were there, and it was around the time of my birthday. And so my husband and I were going out to dinner. We were just married. And we get into a taxi and we're like having this conversation about like, should he change jobs or not? Like one of those conversations you have like hundreds of times over and over again. And the driver is like eavesdropping, like clearly eavesdropping. And he's like, can I ask you a question? How long have you been married? And we said 6 weeks. And he was like, 6 months. And we're like, no, 6 weeks. And he like let out this low vowel-y sound. And we were like, here comes like a whole bunch of unsolicited advice. But instead, to our everlasting astonishment, he broke into song and he sang this like medley of Janis Joplin songs and songs that we found out later that he was from Sierra Leone, but like had the songs that he had grown up with. And we were like, is this happening? It feels like a dream, you know? And he said, do you sing? And we were like, no. And he's like, you don't sing together. And we were like, no, we don't sing together. We're not like showbiz folks, you know? And he was like, well, you have to. And he said, A, B, C, D. And we were like, E, F, G. And he really coaxed us into getting into it. And by Z, we were like really belting it out. And he was like, you have to sing together every week. It's really important. And we have sung the alphabet song every weekend for getting close to 7 years. And it's so silly. And sometimes we were like in a rush and we do it like really quickly. And like in the before times, if one of us was out of town, we do it over the phone. And I mean, now we have a little girl, so it's like not as weird to be singing the alphabet song, but like for a long time, it was just like 2 people in their mid-30s just singing the alphabet song every week. And, you know, it's so silly but it's because it's silly that it's so important, and it brings down your defenses and it reminds you to like have that funny, jokey moment together, even when you're grumpy, even when you're in a big rush, even when you, you know, don't feel like it. And it just takes, you know, whatever it is, 90 seconds. And it's so profound because it's a reminder of what is sacred to us, which is our love and our relationship. And it was like, I mean, it really felt like a dream, or like, you know, or like a Greek myth where a God comes down to earth and like tells the lowly humans what to do. Anyway, so I told this story in San Francisco when my book first came out, and this very dignified gentleman raised his hand and he said, yes, well, my wife and my son and I, we howl at the moon every night before bed. And I have just loved that so much because it was just the same kind of thing. And it made me feel like, okay, lots of people are doing silly things like this, but also what I loved about it was the moon. I mean, it's so astronomical and it's so beautiful and it's so ancient, and I don't know, there's something about that really moved me. And our daughter is very, very interested in the moon, and that's one of the things that I also feel such, you know, that experience of when you're with a child who has this enthusiasm about things that it's very easy to be blasé about. You know, yeah, the moon, it's there, it's always there, but she is really enthusiastic every time she sees it, and really curious about where we are in the phase and what moon we're going to see tonight, and will we be able to see it, and you know, where it will rise from. And it's those kinds of things that I think if we can tap into that kind of enthusiasm and go deeper into our knowledge about how things work with that kind of awe about the natural world and the universe, I think that there are so many celebrations and traditions that could be really meaningful, born out of those kinds of conversations. So I don't know where we are in terms of time, but it seems like a natural point to open things up to questions, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sasha. You have an infectious energy when you speak, and it's just what we needed this morning. And
Thank
I love
you
the
so
story.
much.
Thank you. I love the story of the alphabet. It shows that rituals can come from anywhere and anyone. I love that.
Thank you so much. Yes, we sang it yesterday. We're continuing it.
Good. I guess I'll start with the first question and then we'll go to David DiNucci. You mentioned this a little bit in your talk, but I'm curious if you'd want to go a little deeper. It seems like with everything we've been through as a society over the past year, we have the opportunity to create a new holiday and honor scientists for what they accomplished and how they've helped society. And how do you think our society would be different if we honored science and celebrated those holidays versus supernatural holidays?
Can you imagine? I mean, what a dream that would be. I love that idea. And celebrating, like, maybe there will be a moment when the virus is, declared no longer a threat, like we don't think about smallpox or, other things like that, and polio. And the idea of celebrating that annually. I mean, this is the thing, is our celebrations and our holidays and the days we take off from school and from work, that teaches us what is important. And that it gets from early childhood. You get the sense of what our values are as a society from what we honor enough to take a break from the everyday, from the monotony of the regular schedule. And I think that if we did something like that, if we had a day to celebrate the scientists and the people who came together to solve this problem with the scientific method and with critical thinking, I think that that's the kind of thing that when you first introduce it, when it's new, people are, it feels so different and strange. But within a generation of children who grow up with that, I think that's just the kind of thing that can have a profound change over the generations, in terms of teaching people, teaching ourselves, emphasizing to ourselves what is really meaningful, what really matters, and what we really do have to be grateful for.
Thank you.
I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is from David DiNucci.
One of the first places I saw your mom was at a conference called Beyond Belief that was held at the Salk Institute. And I was really impressed. She gave one terrific answer to a question that came up that just sticks in my mind so much. And you remind me much of her in the way that you present things. It's wonderful. But another thing that was presented at that conference, there was a guy named Loyal Rue who presented this idea of how religions do it. That is how they get people all on the same page and how they celebrate these rituals, etc. And he's kind of saying, maybe we could do things the same way, as they do. And he kind of outlined the approaches that they use, and some of them were indeed these rituals, etc. So it got me to thinking. I mean, some of the rituals you've come up with are very personal and family oriented, etc. But I think that's a picture more of some sort of more general rituals that would be celebrated in large groups or the community at large. I know that the humanist community, some time ago, they came up with this human light celebration that they tried to populate with various kinds of rituals that around Christmas time as an alternative. And it hasn't really taken off too much, but I was wondering what you thought about these, rituals that might encompass, might be more general than just family-wide or whatever.
Yes, that's a really, really good question. Yeah, I know it's Festivus comes to mind also, I think listen, for those of us who live far from the equator, where the days get really short and dark in December, it just cries out for something. And besides the fact that, the whole rest of the culture is like getting all jazzed up for something, and it's hard to be like, no, I'm not going to do anything. And so I think, again, I'm really interested in sort of like peeling back the layers and the winter solstice, just in and of itself, just the idea the days are going to start getting longer. I mean, obviously this would be Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere at different times. And if you live around the equator, it's not going to be like as important. But I think that idea that the light is coming back, I mean, right, all of this candle lighting, menorah lighting, putting up Christmas lights, all of this is about, and I'm sure this is what you're describing, it's all about like, geez, this is kind of depressing and dark, like we better like make things a little bit fancier or whatever. And I think that, you know, having like, I mean, any of us, once we're all vaccinated, any of us, you can have a big, you know, you could have a cocktail party or whatever on the winter solstice, and without making it, because there's always the danger of things getting a little bit woo-woo, you know, and without making it like that, just saying, look, this is how the axial tilt works, you know, and no matter what anyone does, tomorrow things are just going to get that little much bit better, because the days will start getting longer, and inch by inch, we're going to return to summer, and celebrating that in the way, you know, having that as the reason and the explanation and like, you know, the theme, and but still having the events that we all have and crave of like get together for food and, you know, whatever, exchange presents, have cookies, whatever the things are that we all sort of are interested in. I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel necessarily. I think we have to sort of de-invent the wheel, you know, take the layers off and just get to the part that doesn't require any faith, but is still marvelous and worthy of celebration. And I think there's a lot that can be done that way. And, you know, I think that a lot of people are going to be having really big parties and lots of dinner parties, lots of fun, lots of events once we can do this. And I think it's a great time to start something new for your friends and family. And then that's how it spreads. You know, if people are doing it in all different places and inviting more people, I think that that's how it spreads, rather than like an overarching, this is how we're going to do it. But just, you know, having the idea out there and letting people do it their own way, and let it mutate in order to survive.
Our next question is from Lawrence.
Hi, Lawrence.
Hi, muted. First, I want to thank you very much for, first of all, having written the book, and secondly,
thank you,
putting across a message that I feel is very, very much needed. We humanists stand behind science and reason a lot. Your dad, Carl Sagan, did a beautiful, wonderful job in uniting the science and reason thing, especially in Cosmos. Episode 1 is an absolute masterpiece right there. So it's combining the science and reason thing with a sense, communicating the awe, which I don't mind calling spiritual in a sense that, because of the science and reason part, does not dabble in the supernatural, but still it's spiritual. And I think that what you're about when you talk about ritual is verges on something spiritual that humanists and atheists can well accept. So I guess I have to turn this into a question. So my question is, I haven't read your book yet, but apart from talking about the kinds of rituals that you've been talking about this morning, is there any part of your book that goes into the awe thing, that kind of spirituality that is not necessarily connected with ritual, because it's kind of like a feeling that you have on your own? It's not especially communal. So that's my question.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that that's a really good, first of all, thank you so much for what you said. And my dad and my mom, you know, together wrote the original season of Cosmos. And thank you so much. I agree about episode 1. And yes, I do. You know, it's funny because and I think in terms of the word spiritual, right? Deep down, it's spirit, like breath is spiritu. You know, it is about being alive in this way. And we can make an argument that it doesn't necessarily have to have a religious connotation. But yes, I think that those moments of awe and wonder, I mean, I do talk about them in my book, and those moments where there's some something you see or something you experience or some coincidence that feels like a poem to you, but it's impossible to sort of explain. And it is these internal moments where we sort of glimpse a sense of the grandeur and the beauty of being alive, that are so important. And I think that, one of the things that rituals and traditions can help us do is try to coax those moments out. And for some of us, they happen privately, and some rituals are alone. I mean, but sometimes we have to remember to have those moments and try to orchestrate those moments. And I think that's when the coming together can be really useful. But yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's central to this philosophy, is that feeling of looking up at the night sky and getting that chill down the back of your neck, really thinking about where we are and what else there is. And, I think that that is the most ancient thing, no matter what else we're doing. Looking up at the night sky, preparing a meal together, taking care of our young, taking care of our elders, those are the things that no matter what your background is, you can be sure that millennia ago your ancestors were doing. So I think of that as the most traditional in many ways.
I'll read a couple of short questions and comments from the chat. The first comes from Joyce Lackey. Does commercialism of holidays help or hinder?
Oh, well, it's funny because it's like, as a secular person who is not that into Christmas, like when people are like, this is not, because sometimes when people, I'll say like, well, I'm not Christian and I don't believe and whatever. And people will say, oh, Christmas is just about being together. And I'm like such a literalist. And I'm like, it's literally Christ Mass. It's like, so it's like, I almost feel like it's like you go far enough in one direction, you come out the other side. And it's like, I'm with the really fanatical Christian saying this is not what Christmas is really about. And when, it's all candy canes and presents and stuff like that. I don't know. I think that, commercialism, it's so, I mean, to me, it's like, that's American culture, that is almost separate from so much of these events. And, when some of your holidays are not part of the mainstream culture, either because you made them up yourself or because you're a member of a group that's not the majority, you don't have as much of that, you're not exposed to as much of that. But I also think that, when you hear a song that's attached to a certain time of year and it gives people joy and a little skip in their step, and that's part of how the whole country recognizes certain times changing. I don't know. I think it's a double-edged sword, but of course, I mean, America is very bad at not commercializing things in general.
Yeah, I thought the negative was pretty obvious.
Yes.
Our next question is from Hank.
Some years ago, I got connected with a guy named Joseph Campbell, who used to describe himself as a mythologist. And one of the things that he often said was, instead of demythologizing things, we need to re-mythologize them. And when asked about this, he would say, well, people don't understand that mythology is metaphor. They keep concretizing the metaphor, and then the translucence that would allow you to experience what the metaphor is actually pointing you toward is lost. And so a common way I talk about this is to say, when I was in high school, I had to memorize a poem called The Highwayman. And The Highwayman begins with, the road was a ribbon of moonlight. Now, if I read that and I thought, oh, I could get my scissors and go out and cut some things to tie up packages with, there would just be a mistake. So it seems to me that in some ways you are talking about re-mythologizing our experience with a different mythology, one that tells us we know things by having ideas that we check out against experience, as opposed to check out to authority or history or something else. And it just seems to me that culturally we could re-mythologize our experiences along those lines.
Yeah, Karen Armstrong is a historian of religion who I quote quite a bit in my book and whose work I love, even though her own philosophy and theology is very different than mine. And she talks about this idea of everyone, W-H-E-N, everyone, when a myth is not, it's not about a specific time when something happened, but it's this repetitive experience, universal thing that we all, as a metaphor, have experienced throughout time and continue into the future. And if we look at mythology or theology often as a literal point by point historical list of events rather than, as you said, a metaphor, it robs us of what it is. Yeah, I think that, and also Karen Armstrong talks about like this idea of like a myth. It has this implication that it's not verifiably true or, not actually true, rather than sort of the way we use the word mythic, which kind of doesn't have that connotation, but it has this grandeur and beauty that I do think being able to infuse that into the way that we talk about and learn about and teach the scientific phenomena that we've been able to wrap our minds around. I mean, the example that I always give and the thing that I can never get over is there is a secret code in your blood that connects you to your ancestors and to everyone who's ever lived and to the earliest life on earth. And whether you believe in it or not, it has information about you that you don't know. And we only just found out about it. And if DNA was sort of taught in school in that way, where it felt like a fairy tale, like a myth, like this idea of something that seemed so impossible that you could find out your long lost relative, you could find out where your ancestors were thousands of years before you were born, with these clues that we've been able to figure out, and listen, like, if you're lucky, you have a handful of really great science teachers in your schooling, but it just seems like when you're doing the like worksheets with like alleles and like, the double helix and something like that, and children often don't get that sense of how mythic these amazing things we've discovered can be. I think we lose something really profound, and kids become less interested. So yes, I think more of that would be good. So I agree with you.
I love that answer. I'll read the next question coming from the humanist with the ironic name, Al Christians. How do you incorporate into your beliefs the apparent infinity of important things that science does not know and may never know?
Yes, great question. So a big thing that my parents really instilled in me and that I think is so important and something that's so hard is tolerating ambiguity. And, one of like the quotes of my dad that sort of pops up now and again that I love so much is this idea of, I don't want to believe, I want to know. And yes, there is way, way more that we do not understand than the astonishing things that we've managed to get our little brains around in just the last few thousand years. And there is so much we will never know in our lifetimes. Maybe no one will ever know. And there's something, that, next week we could find out that will absolutely blow our minds. But I think that that practice of sitting with ambiguity and not forcing an answer in where, because it's so uncomfortable, and it is so uncomfortable to not know something that you want to know, even the very small things, you know, you're waiting for an important work thing to happen, or, you know, friends of mine, like waiting for the person they have a crush on to text them back, or whatever it is, that feeling of like, you just, the answer has not arrived yet. We do not know the answer. And the urge to fit something in just to have something there so that we're not left wondering. I think if we can find a way to pivot to taking some pleasure in the wondering and the waiting to have information that's real, an answer that's real. I had a colleague years ago when I lived in London who would always say, more will be revealed, about like, you know, a meeting or something, nothing like so grand and profound. But I always hear her voice in my head saying, more will be revealed. And I think that sitting with that ambiguity, and at the same time honoring the ways in which we have found answers, which, you know, are not set in stone. There are things we believe now that maybe later down the road will be totally disproven. But I think that finding a way to get a little bit more comfortable with the waiting, and knowing that what we know is a tiny fraction of what there is to know.
I'll read a couple of comments from the chat. The first comes from Sheila. She says, feeling guilty at not practicing Jewish holidays in a traditional way, I created first day of spring holiday for my 4 children, and it was the favorite family holiday. I celebrated this special day this week with one of my sons in Morro Bay.
Oh, I love that so much, and I deeply, deeply relate. Oh my goodness, that's wonderful.
And from Mike Rouchet, I read an interview where your mother lamented that religions have so much music for their rituals. Freethinkers, not so much. I started a list of songs that strike a spiritual chord in myself that she might check out.
Great. Awesome. You can email me through my website. I'd love to see it. Thank you. I'll pass it along to my mom as well.
Yeah, if I can get the titles right.
Yeah, great. That's wonderful. I know a lot of people who, I mean, it's both, right? It's both that I think a lot of us really crave that, and we all have the experience of hearing a song, and like maybe even after many times of hearing it, realizing what the lyrics are and having that sense of, you know, that deep, profound connection that is, you know, almost, you know, is moving. That I think is a lot of what religious people get out of their immense wealth of religious music. So unfair.
Yeah, well, we also have our Pete and Paul Barquette brothers who do music for us the first Sunday of every month. And they find all sorts of songs that could be listed as humanistic hymns.
Yes, exactly. Well, I'm very curious. Please share that list when you can.
Absolutely.
We have a question in the chat from Helen Christians. I'm curious about how your family recognized your coming of age. What ideas do you recommend to honor a child moving in to taking adult responsibilities? I believe this is a lost aspect of American society.
So this is like one of my favorite things. In the book, there's a chapter about coming of age. And I think the coming of age rituals around the world are really one of the most interesting things and one of the most amazing. And it's just this like time passing, right? We've all had the experience of like a friend's kid who you see when they're like 8 and then you don't see them for a while, and you see them and all of a sudden they're like a teenager and you're like, am I 100 years old? Like, this is so like, how is time passing so quickly? You were just a little kid. And you know, the coming of age ritual is so important, and it's so I think it's almost as much for the society, for the group, for the tribe, as it is for the kid, because we're all sort of reckoning with this idea of like, okay, this is passing the baton to the next generation, and these are the people who are going to be in charge one day, and have we instilled in them enough tools and values and all these things so that they can be in charge. And yeah, I mean, I had a sweet 16. I did not have a bat mitzvah. But the real, I write in the book about what I really felt like was the coming of age transition, which was a little bit more impromptu. And also about, sorry if this is a little bit of, maybe whatever. But I also think, the way we talk about like when girls start to menstruate, and like that being a really amazing, positive, wonderful thing that should be celebrated, rather than like this thing in health class that's like so uncomfortable to talk about and so awkward, and you just can't even listen to your teacher talking about this stuff, and just get me out of here. And I think that, those transitions, and this is also another area where it's so easy to see like a quinceanera or a bar mitzvah, or, first communion or whatever it is, as so different, and so different than one of my favorite rituals that I write about in the book is in Vanuatu in the South Pacific, land diving, it's called, and young men, the men do it, but when you do it for the first time as a young man, it's like that's your coming of age ritual, and you climb to the top of this tower in the trees, and your whole community is around you, and like you talk, you like they're cheering for you, and someone ties pliable vines around your ankles, and it acts as like a bungee cord, and you jump off the tower. And like that to me is like this performance art piece about what it is like to go into adulthood, of like it's all this thrill and excitement and terror and just jumping off this tower. And yes, I think that finding ways to make that transition really special. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's like getting your driver's license or like things like that are rites of passage and are really important, but I don't think we celebrate it in the same way that we might if we really thought about it. And also, again, this is like, we're so removed from the actual, it's this biological change, and like all of a sudden you're taller and smellier, and there's hair, and there's all this stuff, and like your voice changes, and it's like we're so uncomfortable with so much of that that we don't really think about what we're doing when we have these events. But I think they're so important, and it's really one of my favorite genres. So maybe if you may enjoy that chapter in the book.
Great. David DiNucci has another question.
It's sort of related to my last one, and I guess I'm not seeing it as much of a problem in the discussion you're having, but so there have been times when I've wondered about integrating some more of the tools and techniques that religion have used to kind of promote humanism and just nature and all that kind of stuff. But one of the issues is that whenever you come up with a symbol for anything, any kind of abstraction, that just kind of invites, it seems to me, some misunderstanding or some focus on the abstraction that starts to drift away from, reality. And especially since science, our understanding of the world is already changing constantly. Then it seems that any kind of introduction like that brings in the risk of getting us off on a tangent that's more trouble than it's worth. I just wondered if you might comment.
Totally. I mean, it's so hard to create rituals and symbols and things like that because it can feel so contrived, right? At least religious stuff, it has this authority and gravitas that makes it seem like less contrived if you believe in the story around it. And yeah, I think trial and error is the way to do these things. And sometimes things sort of, just naturally evolve. And I think also kind of like being a little bit more tongue in cheek sometimes and having a little sense of humor about ourselves is something that we can offer that maybe a lot of other traditions and philosophical groups shy away from it. And that's something really powerful and something really meaningful, and, encouraging debate and not making it forbidden to say, you know what, I don't like the weird triangle that we decided on or whatever, you know. But the one thing that I write about this in the book, one thing that I really admire, not the one thing, but one thing that I really admire about religious tradition, and I do think that as secular people, as humanists, agnostics, atheists, we can really work on adopting, is the sort of social pressure to do good works and to like come together, you know. And it's not always perfect in religious situations, and obviously we don't need to get into that, but this idea that like you are obliged to volunteer and to do things together and to like go, you know, I think, you know, go work in a soup kitchen or go come together to help somebody out. I think that and it's not always the case in religious groups, but I think that when you see that, I really admire that. And I think that it also would help us, you know, sort of disabuse people from the idea that godlessness and immorality are the same thing. Because if there is no rhyme or reason and there's no big safety net and the bad guys aren't going to get their comeuppance and the good guys aren't going to get their reward, then it's up to us to make a more just world. And that's something that, you know, whether we have the like holidays down and the symbols and that kind of stuff, that's something that we can really make a difference. And I think other things sometimes follow when there's the focus on what we can change.
Helen has a question that she would like to unmute for.
You're right. The idea of at the end of life, and your thought that there is no reward and no punishment. That whole idea. I'm not. Many of my friends know I don't. I'm an atheist, and so I'm not real popular at funerals when people are. I mean, I don't say I'm very
no. Yeah.
But they know my belief system, and so then when they start the jargon of "he's in a better place," it kind of falls empty. They know it, and so just that struggle with the end of life.
It's the deepest question, and I totally, you know, I think it's also one of the most taboo topics, unless you are very religious and you have a thing that you say that you truly believe that mitigates it because you think it's just a little waiting period until you see the person again. Other than that, it's really hard to talk about, and it's really, and people, I think a lot of people, even people who are like maybe a little bit religious but not very devout, and you just don't know what to say. And then I think people, you know, this idea of just like, you know, when you lose someone, the first week or two, people bring food and like and then after that, it's like no one wants to talk about it, not ask about it. And I think this is something I think about a lot, about how do we do this? And I think that the two things that are really powerful are, you know, a family friend, when her father died, a colleague of hers said to her, "I'm so sorry to hear about your dad. Tell me about him." And just let her say, this is what he was like, this is what he used to do, this is what he did, and just like listened for a really long time about this guy that he didn't know. It was just his colleague's dad who he never met. And I thought about that so many times as such a powerful thing. And it's a way to let that person live on a little longer in this way and just get all, and also I think, you know, for me, I think the thing that makes it okay, you know, the thing that makes it bearable is like, in the grand scheme of things, the idea that any of us was ever born, that all the generations of, you know, ancestors had to meet and get together, and that, you know, human beings got to evolve to be human beings, and that the dinosaurs were smited, and that the earth, you know, everything that had to happen in order for each of us to be here. It's so magnificent that we were born at all, that, you know, I think that's the thing that balances out the pain of loss, is that we were here. And if you don't think that everything's preordained, then it's amazing and astonishing that all these random chances lined up to this moment where we're talking to each other over the computer, you know. And I think there's something really powerful in that. It's not always the right way to, you know, say something to someone who's grieving, you know, but I think that there are moments where that really does bring me enormous solace when I think about the people that I miss in my life. that we were here together at all is so beautiful. And the other thing I would just say is, I think that even if at the funeral nobody knows what to say and you don't know what to say, weeks and weeks later, you know, sometimes when the shock has worn off and people go back to their regular lives, checking in with the person who's lost someone even months later and say, how are you doing? I think we have this idea of like, I don't want to upset them. I don't want to remind them, but it's like they're thinking about it all the time. So I think it's really powerful to just say, how are you doing? I'm thinking about you. And then just listen. And, you know, you don't have to say anything at the funeral, but I think being there to listen a long time later,
Yes.
can be really helpful.
Yeah. And in our society now, it's you go to the wake or you go to the funeral and, well, that's done. I'm done. And well, it's not done at all.
Right.
And thank you. Yeah. So
no, this is something I spent a lot of time thinking about, and I write about a little bit in the book, but yeah, that idea that it's such a short period. And in other cultures, of course, there's much longer grieving periods. And there are things that years later are part of the ritual of coming to terms with this loss. And I just think that is a much more realistic way to approach things, because all of these rituals around end of life and funeral, they are for the people who are left behind. Right, exactly. Not for the person who's gone. And we pretend it's for the person who's gone, but it's for us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hank would like to unmute with another question.
Well, let me just say, I have a colleague, I'm a psychologist by training. I have a psychologist colleague of mine from Australia who a while back wrote a book called Reality Slap. And the second edition is going to come out, but it's now going to be called When Life Hits Hard. And I invite you to take a look at it, because he is outlining the technology of how do we literally carry on when life hits hard, because we do know some technology now, you know, based on this idea of the last 400 years of you have experiences and then you have ideas and then you check them out against experience.
Yeah.
See what actually turns out. So if you can kind of put a pin in when life hits hard,
sure.
You know, everybody that's on the thing, you might really want to take a look at it.
What's his name?
His name is Russ Harris.
Okay. All right. Writing it down. Thank you so much.
Do you know where the guy who encouraged the singing was from?
Yes, Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Hank. I'll ask one last question. Give us a chance to end on the very youngest of generations here. Now, Sasha, your daughter is 3.5. I want to know, is there any tradition or ritual that she has already established for the family?
Yes. Okay. So every time, my husband is one of like 4 people in his company who's going back to the office now. And so now that he leaves sometimes, after all this time, when he leaves, we close the door, and then she opens the door with my help because she's small and says, one more kiss, and runs after him and for one more kiss before he leaves for the day. And that is like something that like we have family traditions that my husband and I have sort of created for her, but that is something she invented and we do every morning. And it's really special and beautiful. And I don't know, it's a very small thing, but it brings all 3 of us so much joy. And it underlines our values of loving each other.
Well, I think that's the perfect way to end the presentation today. Thank you so much, Sasha. This was wonderful. Your energy was incredible. And what you're doing for society is deeply meaningful. So thank you
so much. That's so kind of you. And thank you everyone for your excellent questions and for this invitation to be here today. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you very much for
awesome.
For appreciation, a token, a symbol, a ritual. Yes, we will send you a cup of our.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.